You're creating tension, Mom. Maybe stay somewhere else for a while. Those words, they hit me like a physical blow. Right there in my own kitchen, the heart of the home where I brought him into this world. My house. The one I built with my own 2 hands, scrubbing floors and balancing books after my husband, James, passed. I was standing by the sink, the very same one where I'd washed Daniel's baby bottles, when he said it. All I could do was nod. Not because I agreed, not even close, but because the shock, the sheer betrayal had stolen my voice. It felt like a slap I couldn't dodge. I turned the tap on, letting the water run, hoping to hide the tremor in my hands. But it didn't help. Nothing helped. Just an hour earlier, I'd asked her, Harper, politely mind you, not to smoke inside. Not in the house, Harper. Please, I'd said, standing in the living room doorway. She was curled up in James's old recliner, legs tucked under her, holding that skinny cigarette like it was some inalienable right. She looked at me then like I'd asked her to set herself on fire. It's just one, she drawled, not moving an inch. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just said no. Firmly. Clearly. 10 minutes later, she stormed into the kitchen, slamming the screen door hard enough to rattle the glass. And then he followed. My son. My Daniel. But he didn't look angry. That, I think, would have been easier to handle. He looked tired, like I was a problem to be solved. Mom, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd had since he was a boy. I get that it's your place, but we need to keep the peace, okay? She's feeling unwelcome. Unwelcome. The word echoed in my mind, making the very tiles under my feet feel like they were shifting, though I knew they weren't. Does he not even hear himself? She lit a cigarette in the house, Daniel. I asked her not to. Right, but it's just a cigarette and now she's upset and, well, you're creating tension. Maybe stay somewhere else for a while. Somewhere else. In my own home. It felt like I was a tenant or worse. A guest who had overstayed her welcome in a house I poured my entire life into. My mouth went dry. I couldn't speak. I just turned back to the sink and scrubbed a plate that didn't need scrubbing, my heart a raw, bleeding thing in my chest. Harper didn't say a word. She didn't even come back inside. Just stayed on the porch with that smug look on her face, flicking ash into my flower pots. I finished the dishes, put the kettle on. I just needed something, anything, to make me feel like I still had weight, still had a place in this house. This house. It's not fancy. Never was. But every brick has my name on it. Not literally, of course, but close enough. James and I bought it when Daniel was 2. It was a wreck then. No insulation, a leaking roof, a backyard choked with rusted tools and weeds. But we made it into something. A home. After James passed 15 years ago now, I kept it going. Painted the siding myself, replaced the gutters, fixed the fence when a storm knocked it down. I didn't ask anyone for help. And then Daniel got divorced and needed a place. Of course I said yes. What mother wouldn't? He came home with boxes and tired eyes. I gave him his old room. Even cleared out the closet I'd been using for winter coats. He was quiet those first few weeks. Grateful, I think. He'd mow the lawn without being asked, take out the trash, sit with me during dinner, and actually listen when I talked. It felt like I'd gotten my son back, the one I used to walk to school. The one who could make me laugh just by entering a room. Then came Harper. She was polite at first, smiled wide, called me Miss Beverly, even brought me flowers from the grocery store. Offered to cook. I thought she was sweet. Lost, maybe a little too loud, a little too fond of short skirts and eye-rolling, but sweet. But it didn't last. Not 2 weeks later, she started correcting how I folded towels, declared my coffee too bitter, rearranged the living room while I was out getting milk, claiming it was more open now. I kept my mouth shut, told myself not to be one of those mothers, the ones who resent their son's partner. I let it slide, over and over, until today. A cigarette. That was the line. And now I'm the one making things tense. The kettle whistled then, loud and angry, mirroring the storm inside me. I poured the water, sat with my tea, and stared out the kitchen window. The porch light flickered. The wind moved the curtains. I thought about packing a bag. But then a thought, clear and unwavering, sliced through the fog of my despair. No, I was here first. And maybe it was time I remembered that. By the way, if you're still with me, if this story resonates even a little, make sure to hit that subscribe button. More unbelievable, heartfelt stories like this are definitely coming. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Just lay there under the quilt I'd sewn back in '92, listening to the old pipes rattle every time someone used the upstairs bathroom. At some point I heard Harper's laugh. Sharp. Hollow. Like something she did more out of habit than joy. My bedroom felt cold, though it wasn't. I didn't turn on the heater. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of hearing the creak of the thermostat and knowing I was awake. Instead, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the first time I saw this house. We'd driven past it by accident. James had missed the turn to the hardware store, and I was fussing at him for it. Then I saw the for sale sign, crooked, weather-beaten, almost an afterthought, stuck in the front yard like a broken promise. The place looked abandoned. One shutter hung loose, the porch sagged, and the lawn had eaten the walkway whole. But I said, "That's the one." He thought I was joking. I wasn't. We put in an offer the next day. Everyone said we were crazy. Termites, lead paint, a foundation that groaned like an old man. But we didn't have much money, and a baby boy who didn't like sleeping in apartments with neighbors shouting through the walls. This house had bones. Ugly, stubborn bones. But good ones. And we fixed it. Board by board. Nail by nail. James learned carpentry from a book. I learned how to patch drywall and budget down to the last penny. I painted every room myself. Soft colors, the kind that made you breathe easier just by looking at them. The kitchen was my favorite. Still is. Yellow walls, blue trim. A table that's too big for one person, but just right for memories. When James died, I thought I'd leave. Sell the place. Move closer to my sister in Ohio. But I couldn't. Every room whispered his name. Every creak of the stairs felt like him walking back from the garage with oil on his hands and a tired smile. So I stayed. Built a new rhythm. Church on Sundays, bingo on Thursdays, gardening when my knees allowed. And Daniel? He'd call. Not as often as I liked, but often enough to keep my heart from cracking open. Then came the divorce. And then came the boxes. Now here we are. My house, but not my home. Not lately. I made breakfast early the next morning. Not because I wanted to, but because it's what I do. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon. I set the table with the good plates. Daniel came down first, hair still wet from the shower, shirt wrinkled. He paused when he saw the spread. "You didn't have to do all this," he mumbled. I didn't answer. Just poured his coffee. Harper came down 10 minutes later, wearing one of Daniel's old sweatshirts like she owned it. She sniffed at the food and said nothing. Sat down. Pulled out her phone. We ate mostly in silence, except for Daniel clearing his throat now and then, like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. When they were done, Harper stood up, stretched, and without looking at me said, "We're going to the farmer's market. Be back later." I nodded. The door closed behind them, and I sat there at the kitchen table alone again. That's when I opened the drawer. Bottom left. Always stuck unless you knew how to pull it just right. Inside were the papers. House deed. Insurance. The check stubs from when James and I paid the mortgage down early. Every single one neatly stacked, rubber banded, labeled in my handwriting. I ran my fingers over the top sheet. My name. His name. No Harper. I pulled out the envelope beneath it. Daniel's name on the front. Years ago, after he graduated, we'd given him money for a down payment on a condo in Phoenix. He stayed there 3 years, then sold it for a profit. Didn't tell me until months later. Said he needed the money to restructure his life. I didn't ask what that meant. Inside the envelope was a copy of the wire transfer. $50,000. My name in the memo line. For your first home. Love, Mom. I set it on the table beside his coffee cup. Let him see it. Let him remember. Because if he was going to treat me like a boarder in my own house, maybe it was time I reminded him who built the damn walls. They came back from the market with arms full of things we didn't need. A ceramic bowl handcrafted by a local artist. A bundle of lavender Harper said would help the energy in the house. And a jar of pickled something Daniel proudly declared was fermented for 22 months. I didn't say much. Just watched them set their treasures on the counter like offerings to some imagined altar. Harper was all high spirits again, laughing too loud, pulling Daniel by the wrist as if I wasn't even in the room. I suppose to her I wasn't. He saw the envelope before I said a word. I was sitting at the table, my knitting in my lap, watching the sky turn the color of rust outside the window. He picked it up, slid the papers out, and stood there for a long time not saying a word. "What's that?" Harper asked. He didn't answer her. He just looked at me. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I folded the yarn back into my lap. "To remind you." "Remind me of what?" "That I'm not some lodger here. That I built this place. That I helped you more than once when you needed it. And that I deserve basic respect in my own home." Harper rolled her eyes. "Oh, come on. This again." Daniel shot her a glance, but she didn't back down. "You're making a big deal out of one cigarette," she scoffed, leaning against the fridge like she owned it. "You didn't have to leave that out just to guilt-trip him." I turned my gaze to her then, not angry, just profoundly, deeply tired. "You lit it in the living room, Harper, after I asked you not to. It was cold outside. There are jackets." Daniel stepped in then, palms raised like a referee. "Can we just not do this right now, please?" I stood up, slower than I used to, but steady. My voice when it came was soft but firm. "I've spent the last few months shrinking myself, Daniel, making room for her, for you. I've swallowed comments, ignored slights, even stepped around my own things like I was a guest. But no more. This is my home. This is my line. And if you can't live with that, then maybe it's not me who needs to find somewhere else." He looked stunned, like I'd slapped him. Harper scoffed. "Wow." I walked out before either of them could speak again. Not because I was angry, but because I needed air. Real air. Not the kind soaked with lavender oil and judgment. I went to the garden. It's not much. Just a patch behind the shed. Overgrown in places, mostly weeds these days, but it's mine. My hands planted every bulb, pulled every root. There's a bench back there, an old iron one with flaking paint, and I sat on it like I used to when James was still alive. He'd read the paper out loud to me on this bench, laughed at the obituaries when he spotted names he didn't like. "That old goat finally croaked," he'd say, then shake his head and smile. I missed that laugh. I missed someone who saw me as more than an obstacle. I sat there until the light faded. And the mosquitoes got bold. Then I went back inside. The house was quiet. No voices, no movement. I checked the driveway. Daniel's car was still there. So was Harper's. They were avoiding me now. That was fine. I went upstairs, closed my door, and locked it for the first time in years. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not well, but better. Because I had remembered something important. I belonged to myself first. The next morning, the house was too quiet. I woke before dawn like always and padded to the kitchen in my slippers. The coffee pot sat empty. The sink was spotless, and the lavender Harper had hung by the window had already begun to wilt. I stared at it for a while, then plucked it down and dropped it in the trash without a sound. I made my coffee the way I like it, strong, black, no fuss, and sat at the kitchen table, watching the early light creep across the linoleum floor. I listened for footsteps. Nothing. It was nearly 9 when I heard movement upstairs. A door opened. Footsteps padded to the bathroom, then back again. But they didn't come down. Not for coffee. Not for anything. They were hiding. I almost laughed. By mid-morning, I'd decided I'd had enough of being invisible in my own house. I walked into the living room and looked around. James's recliner, where Harper had planted herself night after night, was still slightly indented. The coffee table was cluttered with coasters they never used, and some self-help book Harper had left behind about boundaries and energy healing. I gathered everything that wasn't mine. Every throw pillow, magazine, trinket, and scented candle that hadn't belonged here 6 months ago. I placed them carefully, neatly, respectfully, into a cardboard box I'd saved from Daniel's move. Then I tucked the box by the stairs. Not out of spite, just out of clarity. I vacuumed the rugs, dusted the shelves, opened the windows, and let the real air in. By the time I heard the creak of Daniel's foot on the landing, I was in the sunroom, clipping dead leaves from my spider plant. He peeked in like a child unsure whether he was in trouble. "Hey," he said. "Morning." He stepped in, looked around like he was seeing the house for the first time. "You've been busy." "I have." He glanced toward the living room. "Where's the—" "In the box," I said, not looking up. He shifted awkwardly. Harper's upset." I snipped another leaf. "I'm not surprised. She said you touched her things." "I touched the things that weren't part of this house." Silence, then soft, almost like he didn't want me to hear. "She thinks you're trying to push her out." I set the scissors down and met his eyes. "I'm not trying to push anyone out, Daniel. I'm just reclaiming space." I gave up too quickly. He didn't have an answer for that. Just stood there rubbing his thumb over the edge of the door frame, the way he used to when he was nervous as a boy. "I thought I was doing the right thing," he said finally. "Bringing her here. Starting fresh." "And maybe you were," I said gently. "But fresh doesn't mean erasing what already exists." He looked tired, worn out in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She's younger than me," he admitted. "By a lot. She's used to a different kind of life. Her parents live in condos. They eat sushi. They don't grow tomatoes in the backyard." I smiled despite myself. "Scandalous." He chuckled weakly. "I just wanted her to feel at home, and I want to keep mine." We looked at each other for a long time, not in anger, just with the kind of honesty that only happens after things have broken wide open. "I don't want to lose you," he said. "Then don't treat me like a problem to solve." He nodded slowly. "She's going to be angry," he said. "Let her be. That's her work to do." I walked past him, then back into the kitchen where the coffee had gone cold. I poured it down the sink, made a fresh pot. He didn't follow me. Not right away. But later, much later, I heard Harper's voice, sharp, cutting from upstairs. And then a door slammed. That night, I heard the television through the floorboards. Muffled voices. Bursts of laughter that didn't sound real. Harper was watching one of those reality shows she liked. Women screaming at each other over dinner. Men pounding their chests like toddlers in suits. I turned on the radio in my room to drown it out. Old jazz. Billie Holiday. Her voice filled the corners of my room like warm water, and I let myself float. I didn't hear Daniel come to bed. I didn't hear the TV go quiet. I only knew morning had come because the light reached my eyes before the alarm clock did. When I came down, the box was gone. Not returned. Not unpacked. Gone. I checked the closet by the door, still full. Checked the garage, still hers. So they hadn't moved out. Just made a point. I made eggs just for me. Set one place at the table. Ate slowly. And left the dishes in the sink for the first time in a month. Let them see how a home doesn't run itself. Let them taste the silence. Daniel was the first to come down. He looked like he hadn't slept much. Eyes puffy, shirt misbuttoned. He poured coffee and stood there with the mug like he was waiting for permission to speak. I didn't give it. Eventually he said, "She thinks you don't like her." I looked up from my newspaper. "That's not entirely accurate," I said. He winced. "She's trying, Mom. She really is." "Is she?" "She feels judged. Because she smoked in the house? Because she rearranged my living room? Or because she walks around like she owns it?" Daniel sat down across from me, his coffee still untouched. "She didn't grow up like we did," he said. "Her mom let her paint on the walls, leave dishes in the sink, stay out until 2. This structure, this house, it feels stiff to her." "And what about how it feels to me?" He didn't answer that. Instead he rubbed his eyes. "She says she's walking on eggshells. Then maybe she should stop stomping." He let out a breath, exasperated, tired. The kind of sigh men use when they want to signal that the women around them are being difficult. James used to do the same. Only I didn't let it slide then either. "I'm not the villain here," I said calmly. "I didn't say you were. You didn't have to." He looked down at the table. There was a breadcrumb near his elbow, and he wiped it away like it had personally offended him. Then he said something I didn't expect. "We might take a trip." I raised an eyebrow. "Where to?" "Her sister's place. Just for a bit." "To cool off?" "To regroup." I nodded slowly, took a sip of my now lukewarm coffee. "You should go," I said. "You're okay with that?" I looked at him. My son. My only child. A grown man, aging at the edges, still not sure how to sit with discomfort without running from it. "I'm okay with whatever helps you figure out who you are in this house," I said, "and what you're willing to protect." He looked at me then, not like a son, not like a man caught between 2 women, but like someone seeing the outline of a wall he hadn't realized he'd run into. "I'll talk to her," he said. I nodded. "You do that." He left his coffee on the table untouched. When they drove off later that afternoon, he didn't say goodbye. Neither did she. The tires crunched over the gravel, and I stood at the sink again, watching them disappear past the old mailbox that still had James's name half-faded on the side. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just stood there, feeling something settle inside me, like the house had exhaled like I had. The first evening alone again was strange. Not quiet exactly, but still, as if the house was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd celebrate or fall apart. I did neither. I made myself a sandwich, sat in the den, watched the news with the volume low. When the weatherman said a cold front was coming in, I got up and laid out an extra quilt on the guest bed. Not because anyone was coming, but because I could. The air smelled like wood polish and old curtains. Not like that perfume nonsense Harper sprayed everywhere. I'd open every window the minute they left, and it was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I had to apologize to my own walls. Later that night, I wandered into the upstairs hallway and found the door to Daniel's old room ajar. Harper's perfume still lingered. A sweet, cloying thing that didn't belong in a room painted soft green with baseball posters on the closet door. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Then I turned on the light and began. First the closet. Her things were still there. Dresses that didn't belong to a woman planning a short trip. Boxes labeled with her name in bold marker. Her shoes. Her lotions. Her makeup bag. I gathered it all box by box. I carried her life out of that room and into the guest's bedroom. I didn't toss or break or mutter. I placed everything with care, but I placed it out. Out of Daniel's room. Out of James's house. When I was done, I made the bed, straightened the covers, closed the door. Then I went back to my room, lay down, and slept better than I had in months. The next morning I called my lawyer. "Meredith, it's Beverly. I want to talk about the house." She paused. "Everything all right?" "It will be," I said. "I just need to make sure things are clear." We set a date. She'd come over the following week. We'd review the documents. Ownership rights, power of attorney. I didn't want to be dramatic. I just wanted to be prepared. After the call, I sat on the porch with my tea and watched the neighbors' kids race their bikes up and down the street. Their laughter was sharp and clean like wind chimes. One of the girls waved. I waved back. Inside, the silence was no longer heavy. It was mine. I spent the rest of the day doing little things. Polishing the silver, washing the curtains, pulling weeds from the cracks in the front walkway. Every task felt like laying a brick back into place. That evening, I made chicken pot pie just for me. Ate it in the kitchen with Billie Holiday again, humming under her breath in the background. When I was done, I packed the rest into containers and wrote a note for Ruth down the street. Her arthritis had been flaring again, and I knew she wasn't cooking much lately. At dusk, I walked over and left the food on her porch. Rang the bell. When she opened the door, her eyes widened. "Beverly, is everything okay?" "Everything's just fine," I said. "Thought you might be hungry." She looked at me for a long second, then smiled. "You look lighter." "I feel lighter." We stood there in the soft light of the porch bulb. Two old women who had outlived their husbands, outlasted their patience, and were still standing, still giving. But this time I was giving by choice, not from obligation. From strength. They came back on a Sunday afternoon, 3 days earlier than they said they would. I was on my knees in the front yard, digging around the roots of my hydrangeas when I heard the car. The tires crunched gravel, the engine cut off, then footsteps, 2 sets approaching slow, unsure. I didn't stand up, just kept working the soil, careful not to snap the new buds. "Mom!" Daniel's voice. Hesitant. I sat back on my heels and turned. They stood at the edge of the walkway. Harper holding a paper coffee cup, sunglasses still on, though the sun was nearly gone. "We got back early," he said. "I see that. We didn't want to surprise you." "You did." He looked around. The porch. The flower beds. The house. "Everything looks nice." I had time. Harper shifted beside him, crossed her arms. "We didn't mean for things to get so tense." I looked at her for the first time. Really looked. She wasn't smug. Not today. She looked tired, deflated. "It wasn't the cigarette," I said, brushing dirt from my gloves. "It was the assumption." She frowned. "What do you mean?" "That my space wasn't worth asking about. That my rules were optional. That I was an obstacle instead of a person." Daniel stepped forward. "Can we come in?" I thought for a second, then nodded. Inside, I set the kettle on. The kitchen smelled like lemon and thyme. I baked a loaf that morning just for myself, the kind James liked. Daniel noticed it right away. "You made bread." "Every Sunday." Harper sat at the table, stiff as a student in the principal's office. Daniel joined her. They both looked smaller somehow, like they'd rehearsed something in the car, but it had unraveled in the presence of old wallpaper and linoleum floors. "Look," Daniel started. "We've talked a lot, and we know things got off balance." "That's one way to put it." He winced. "I wasn't trying to push you out, but you did." Harper finally spoke. "I felt like I couldn't breathe here, and I felt like I didn't exist." She dropped her gaze. Daniel leaned forward. "We want to make this right." I poured the water, set 3 mugs on the table. For a moment it looked like peace. But it wasn't. "Not yet." "How?" I asked. Silence. Then Harper said, "We're looking for our own place." I blinked. "We talked about it on the drive," she went on. "And I realized I don't want to live somewhere I can't be myself. And I don't want to be the reason a mother and son barely speak." Daniel nodded. "I think we moved too fast." I think I didn't think. I sipped my tea. It was still too hot, but I welcomed the burn. It reminded me I was alive. Present. "Finding your own place," I said slowly. "That's a good idea." Harper exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since Tuesday. "But not just for you," I added. "For me too." Daniel tilted his head. What do you mean? I need my house back. Not just the rooms. The feeling. The air. I need to walk barefoot in the hall at night without stepping over someone's shoes. I need to open my fridge without finding organic oat milk I never asked for. A pause. Then Daniel laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard since before the divorce. I miss your milk, he said. That thick whole stuff that clogs arteries. I smiled. Still in the fridge. He looked at Harper. You okay with this? She nodded. I think I am. And just like that, the temperature shifted. Not warm yet, but not frozen. We drank our tea, talked about logistics, about listings and timelines. When they left, Daniel hugged me at the door. Thanks, Mom, he said. I nodded. Then he added, for not kicking us out. I didn't answer. Because the truth was I had. Just not in words. That night, I sat in James's old recliner for the first time in months. It felt like reclaiming a throne I'd forgotten belonged to me. The cushions remembered me at least. They gave just enough to make the sitting easy, familiar, like an embrace. I pulled the knitted throw over my legs, the one I'd made during the winter Daniel left for college. Back then, the quiet of the house had a different weight. Lonelier, uncertain. This quiet was different. I'd earned this one. The house was still. No voices upstairs, no doors opening and closing. No giggling from the hallway like children sneaking into the kitchen. Just me and the ticking of the wall clock, steady as breath. I looked around the room. The furniture sat exactly where it used to. My photo albums lined the shelf in their proper order again. Even the lamp, that crooked little thing with the floral shade, had made its way back to its rightful place beside the chair. I exhaled deeply, and then I spoke to him. You would have hated her perfume, James. I could almost hear him grunt his agreement. He had never been one for scented anything. Said a home should smell like fresh laundry, good food, and maybe a hint of wood polish if the sun hit just right. She rearranged the living room, I said. Moved your recliner by the window, said it made the space feel more open. Silence. But I imagined his look, that quiet disapproval he saved for things like overcooked steak or crooked picture frames. I smiled. I let her for a while. I let a lot of things go. The weight of those months settled over me then, but it didn't crush me. Not anymore. Daniel's trying, I added. He's caught in it like a fly in warm honey. Wants to please her. Please me. Please everyone. I reached for my tea, now lukewarm, and sipped. Anyway, I finally drew a line. The clock ticked again, louder than before, like it was keeping score. And they're moving out. Just saying the words filled me with something I couldn't name. Part relief, part sorrow, because it shouldn't have taken this long. I shouldn't have had to explain so much just to be seen. But I did. And now things would change. A knock came at the door around 9. I frowned. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, a breeze rushed in, first cool and curious. Then a figure stepped forward. Harper. Alone. She looked smaller than usual, as if the night had pressed her down a bit. I didn't mean to bother you, she said. Daniel's in the car. I wanted to say something. I nodded, stepped aside. She didn't sit. Just hovered near the door, arms wrapped tight around herself. I didn't grow up with boundaries, she said quickly. My mom let me do whatever I wanted. My dad wasn't around. Rules felt like rejection. I stayed quiet. Let her talk. So when you asked me not to smoke in the house, it felt like a power move. Like you were drawing a circle I couldn't be part of. You were right, I said. She blinked. I was drawing a circle around myself. Around what I've spent decades building. And not everything fits inside. Her shoulders slumped a little. I'm sorry, she said. I believed her. Not because she said it perfectly, but because her voice cracked a little at the edges and because she came alone. I'm not your enemy, Harper, I said. But I'm not your doormat either. She nodded. Then she handed me a small box. Inside was a new set of tea towels, blue with tiny stitched violets in the corners. Not expensive, not flashy, but thoughtful. I saw them at the market, she said. Reminded me of you. I touched the fabric gently. They're lovely. She smiled, brief and crooked, then turned to leave. Just before stepping out, she turned back. You're stronger than I thought. I met her gaze. I've always been strong. You're just seeing it now. The next morning, I sat with Meredith at the kitchen table. A pile of manila folders spread between us like a paper battlefield. She was efficient, soft-spoken, but didn't pull punches. The kind of woman who wore pearls not for elegance, but as armor. So, she said, flipping through the documents, the house is still solely in your name, which gives you full control. But the question is, what do you want to protect? I glanced toward the window where the sun lit the yard like a spotlight on a stage I'd stood on my whole life. The fence still leaned a little on the south side. The hydrangeas were starting to bloom again. A bird had nested in the porch eaves. All of it, I said. I want to protect all of it. She nodded. That includes your autonomy? Yes. Then we can revise the trust. She began explaining the details about living trusts, inheritance clauses, conditions. I listened carefully, pen in hand, and initialed where she pointed. No hesitation. For years I had told myself that keeping peace meant staying silent. But peace isn't silence. Peace is protection. Boundaries. Knowing where the line is and standing firmly on the side that doesn't cost you your dignity. We spent nearly an hour going through the paperwork. I added a clause. If I were ever to become unable to live independently, the house would not go to Daniel automatically. It would go into a trust managed by a neutral third party, and any decisions would have to include me, my voice, or my words in writing. Meredith looked up at me after I signed the last page. Most people your age are afraid to upset their children. I'm not most people, I said. When she left, I made myself a fresh pot of tea and sat by the window. The tea towels Harper had given me were now neatly folded in the drawer. I hadn't decided if I'd use them yet. Some gifts take time to unfold. The phone rang once around midday. Daniel. I didn't pick up. Not out of spite. I just wasn't ready to talk again. I needed the day to myself to let everything settle. By evening I felt different. Not angry, not proud, just rooted. I took out the photo albums, the ones from when Daniel was small. Him in his Halloween costume. A crooked astronaut helmet made from a mixing bowl and aluminum foil. Him with James at the lake, grinning over a fish barely bigger than his hand. Him on graduation day, looking uncertain but trying to hide it. He used to need me for everything and I had given it all. Food, money, rides, sleepless nights. I'd written checks when he stumbled, answered calls when his marriage cracked, opened the door when he had nowhere else to go. But what I needed, respect, reciprocity, even basic care, had too often come last. I slipped one photo out of the album. It was a Polaroid, a little faded. Me and James on this very porch, Daniel on my lap. He must have been 3. I looked so young. He looked so safe. I pinned it to the fridge with a ceramic magnet shaped like a tomato, one of the ones Daniel had made in school. Not for nostalgia. For memory. Because remembering is the first step to not repeating. As the sky turned gold, I went out and sat on the porch swing. It creaked a little, as it always had. The air smelled like lilac and old wood. The breeze lifted a strand of hair from my temple. And I thought, this is mine. All of it. Not because I claimed it loudly, but because I finally stopped giving it away. The first thing I did the next morning was move the shoes. Daniel had left 3 pairs by the front door. His sneakers, his work boots, and a pair of loafers he never wore, but always kept just in case. They'd been there for weeks, half blocking the hallway, like a trail marker for a life that no longer respected mine. I picked them up one by one, and placed them neatly in the coat closet. Not to be cruel. Just to breathe. Then I walked through the rest of the house with a small notepad in hand. The same one I used to make grocery lists or holiday menus. Only now I made a different list. Take back the garage. Put my books back on the sunroom shelf. Rearrange the pantry. Get rid of her protein powders. These weren't chores. These were reclamations. Small, steady acts of remembering where I lived. Of reminding the house it belonged to me, not to the chaos I'd allowed in under the name of hospitality. I started with the garage. James had turned it into a workspace years ago. Not for cars like most men, but for tinkering. Birdhouses. Picture frames. Little wooden boxes that held everything from buttons to receipts. After he passed, I'd kept it clean, organized, sacred. When Daniel moved in, he said he needed a bit of space for his things. That bit became a wall, then a corner, then half the room. When I stepped inside now, I could still smell sawdust under the chemical tang of paint thinner and old Jim's shoes. His boxes were everywhere. Electronics. Broken monitors. Extension cords, entangled nests. I moved what I could to the shelves, labeled what wasn't mine. And then I found it, tucked behind an old tarp. The last birdhouse James had made. It was unfinished. The paint only halfway done, one side still bare wood. I ran my fingers along the edges, rough in places but strong. Like him. I carried it back inside, set it on the kitchen counter. That evening, I sat in the sunroom and opened the curtains wide. My books were back on the shelves now. My gardening encyclopedia, mystery novels, my battered old copy of Little Women with underlined passages and dog-eared pages. They had been boxed up for months to make room for Harper's lifestyle magazines and self-help paperbacks I never touched. I read for an hour, maybe more. When I finally stood up, I didn't feel stiff. I felt awake. The next day I got a letter. A real one. Not a bill or a coupon booklet, but a letter in an envelope with my name written carefully in blue ink. It was from Ruth, my neighbor. Dear Beverly, the chicken pie you left was delicious. I haven't had a proper meal in days, and it warmed more than just my stomach. You always think of others. I hope someone is thinking of you too. Fondly, Ruth. I held the paper in my hands for a long time. Then I read it again. And again. That evening I pulled out my own stationery, the heavy kind I save for serious things, and wrote back, Dear Ruth, thank you for the kind words. I'm doing better than I've done in years. Sometimes it takes a small fracture to remember what you're made of. I'll stop by with lemon bars tomorrow. Love, Beverly. I sealed the letter and set it by the door. Then I looked around the house. The shoes were gone. The garage was quiet. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon. And for the first time in a long time, everything felt exactly where it should be. The call came in just after noon. Daniel. This time I picked up. Hey, he said cautiously. Hello. I didn't want to bother you. Just checking in. I waited. He cleared his throat. We signed a lease this morning. I let the silence sit between us. Sometimes silence speaks more than any sigh or word. It's small, he added, but it's got a little patio. Harper's excited. I imagined her there buying wind chimes, planting succulents in ceramic pots, a place she could smoke and rearrange things to her heart's content. Place that wasn't mine. I'm glad, I said finally. Yeah, me too. Another pause. Then, can I come by? Just me. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to see him, but because I wasn't sure what version of him I'd be letting in. The son who wanted peace, or the man who only understood it when it cost someone else. But I said yes. He arrived 20 minutes later alone, holding a brown paper bag from the bakery downtown. He handed it to me like a peace offering. Blueberry scones, he said. Your favorite. I took the bag, set it on the counter. We stood there for a moment, neither of us quite knowing how to begin. You've changed the place, he said, looking around. I put it back. He nodded. We sat at the table. He took a scone, broke it in half, but didn't eat it. I haven't been fair, he said. To you. To the house. To everything you've given. That caught my attention. He wasn't just reciting. I thought if I kept everyone comfortable, I could keep everything intact. But I ended up making you invisible. I said nothing. Let the weight of his words fill the room like fog. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid if I didn't keep her happy, she'd leave too. And what about me? I asked softly. He winced. You were always solid. I figured you'd be fine. That's what people say before they step on someone's back to reach higher ground. He looked at me then, really looked, and for once I saw not a boy, not a guest, but a man trying to understand the damage he'd done. I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't dramatic. No tears. No trembling voice. Just steady. True. I took a sip of my tea. It had gone lukewarm again, but I didn't care. Do you remember that time your bike got stolen from the schoolyard? I asked. He looked surprised. Yeah. I was 10. I told you not to leave it unlocked. You cried for 2 days, swore you'd never ride again. But then James found an old one at a yard sale and fixed it up. I remember. You fell off twice that first week. He smiled faintly. Scraped both knees. But you kept riding. He nodded slowly. People are the same, I said. You fall. You hurt someone. But if you care enough, you learn how to do better. He blinked. Are we okay? I folded my hands on the table. We're on the path. That's enough for now. He stayed another hour, helped me take out the recycling, asked about the garden, picked a few sprigs of rosemary like he used to when he was little, pretending to be a chef. And when he left, he hugged me like he meant it. Not out of guilt, but out of something closer to love. The next few days were quiet again, but not the uneasy kind. More like the kind that comes after a storm. When the air smells clean and the leaves stop twitching. Daniel didn't call, but I didn't expect him to. I knew he needed time to find his footing in the new place. I imagined him assembling IKEA furniture with Harper. Both of them arguing over instructions, one missing screw away from a meltdown. It was their turn to figure things out. Mine had passed. I'd already done my figuring and then some. I went back to my routine. Grocery store on Wednesday. Church on Sunday. I even pulled out my old sewing machine and started hemming the curtains in the guest room. It had been years since I'd threaded a bobbin, but my hands remembered. One afternoon, Ruth stopped by with a jar of her fig preserves. I invited her in for tea, and we sat on the porch like two women who'd been through too much and finally decided to stop apologizing for it. You know what's funny? She said, stirring her cup. When I was younger, I used to think the worst thing was being alone. But now I think the worst thing is feeling alone when you're surrounded by people. I nodded. Especially in your own home. She patted my hand. You've done something brave, Beverly. Most women wouldn't. It didn't feel brave. It felt necessary. That's what real courage is. Later that evening, I sat with the birdhouse again. The one James had left unfinished. I got out his old brushes, the small ones he used for detail work, and opened a jar of paint I'd kept in the basement for too long. The color had thickened, but with a little water and patience it softened. I painted the roof red. James never used red. Always soft greens, browns, muted blues. But I wanted it to stand out. Like a heartbeat on the side of the house. I worked slowly, carefully. Each stroke felt like a word I hadn't said before. I thought about Daniel's question. Are we okay? And the way I'd answered it. We're on the path. That was still true. But I knew what came next. The next morning I took out a sheet of stationery, wrote a letter in long looping script, folded it, placed it in an envelope. Then I tucked it under a magnet on the refrigerator door. It wasn't a goodbye. It was an invitation. Daniel, I hope the new place is treating you well. You're welcome to visit any Sunday. Just let me know you're coming. This house still holds love for you, but it also holds rules. And those rules matter now. Love, Mom. I didn't call to tell him it was there. Didn't follow up with a text. Just left it. Quiet and steady like a light in the window. That night I set the table for one. Then, on second thought, I added a second plate just in case. Not out of hope, but out of readiness. By Friday, the letter was still untouched on the fridge. I didn't move it. Didn't throw it away. Just left it there like an open door. That day, I went into town for the farmer's market, the same one Daniel and Harper had visited weeks ago. Arms full of things they didn't need. I walked slower than I used to, paused longer at each stall. Not because of age, though my knees aren't what they were, but because I was in no rush to be anywhere else. I bought fresh peaches, a jar of local honey, a small bundle of eucalyptus that made my whole bag smell like calm. On the way back to the car, I ran into Mrs. Darnell from church. We chatted about the heat, the tomatoes this year, the slow leak in her husband's tire. She asked if Daniel was still living with me. No, I said. They've got their own place now. She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. Just said, "Good for you," and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. Back home, I set the peaches in a bowl on the kitchen table and stood there a long time looking around. The silence wasn't full anymore. It was balanced. I went upstairs, opened the windows in every room, let the breeze move through the house like a guest who doesn't need to be entertained. And then I did something I hadn't done since before Daniel moved in. I packed a bag. Not a suitcase. Not the kind of thing you take when you're escaping. Just a small canvas tote with a change of clothes, my book, my toothbrush. I wasn't running away. I wasn't being pushed out. I just wanted to leave on my own terms. That evening I drove to the lake, the one James used to take us to in the summer, where Daniel once got stung by a bee and demanded an ice cream to compensate. I rented a cabin for the weekend. Nothing fancy, just wood walls, a screened porch, and a view of the water that turned gold at sunset. I spent the first night sitting on the dock, wrapped in a blanket, listening to frogs and wind. I thought about James, about Daniel, about the way a house can hold your soul, but only if you're brave enough to stay present in it. The next morning I made myself coffee in the little kitchen, ate toast with honey. Then I pulled out my book and read until the sun moved across the floorboards. No phone, no emails, just breath. On Sunday afternoon I returned home. The mailbox was full. I sorted the mail quickly, tossing flyers and coupons into the bin. A small envelope with no return address sat on top. I opened it last. Inside was a handwritten card. "Mom, thanks for the letter. We'd like to come for dinner next week. Sunday if that works. Just us. We'll bring dessert. Let me know. I smiled. Then I placed the card beside the peaches on the table. That night I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling. I thought about how easily I could have disappeared. How simple it would have been to make myself smaller, quieter, more accommodating like I had so many times before. But instead I'd paused, spoken, stood still when I could have stepped aside. And now I had the house. I had myself. And if Daniel was going to return, he'd return to a place with walls that didn't bend to silence, but stood tall because of it. Sunday came with a breeze that rattled the porch chimes and stirred the curtains in the kitchen. I woke early, not out of nerves but from habit. The body remembers what the heart tries to forget. I set the table for 3, pulled out the nice plates, the ones I used to save for holidays, then stopped using altogether once the house felt too crowded with tension and too empty of care. Today felt worthy. Not because it was perfect but because it was chosen. I made roast chicken with rosemary, potatoes crisp just the way Daniel liked them. Green beans with lemon. No quinoa. No tofu. No attempts to accommodate a world that didn't ask how I felt before entering. By 4 o'clock, the chicken was resting under foil. The sun had shifted across the living room floor, making everything golden. I sat on the porch swing with a glass of iced tea and waited. At 4:23 their car pulled up. Daniel stepped out first, carrying a covered dish. Harper followed, holding what looked like a store-bought pie. Lemon meringue. A small silent gesture. They walked to the porch slowly, like people who'd rehearsed what not to say. "Smells amazing," Daniel said as they stepped inside. "Dinner's almost ready," I said. "Make yourselves comfortable." They sat at the table while I plated the food. I moved without rush. Let the clinking of forks and glasses fill the room before words did. It was Harper who spoke first. "This looks beautiful," she said. "Thank you for having us." I met her eyes. "Thank you for coming." We ate in a kind of quiet that wasn't awkward, just cautious, like walking across a bridge you just finished rebuilding. Daniel asked about the garden. I told him the tomatoes were late this year. Harper complimented the curtains. I told her I'd hem them myself. The conversation was shallow, but it flowed. After dinner, Daniel helped clear the plates. Harper dried. We moved like a trio who remembered the steps, even if the music had changed. And then, as we stood in the kitchen with the last plate drying in the rack, Daniel asked if he could see the garage. "Of course," I said. He walked out the back door and disappeared into the dim light of the side yard. I turned back to Harper, who stood there, twisting a dish towel in her hands. "Can I say something?" she asked. "You can." She took a breath. "You were right about a lot. I didn't know what it meant to enter someone else's life. I just thought if I acted like I belonged, I would." I nodded. "But it doesn't work like that," she said. "And I see now I wasn't just rude. I was careless with your space. With your patience." It was the closest thing to truth I'd heard from her. "Thank you," I said. She smiled, not wide, not polished, just honest. Then Daniel returned, holding something wrapped in an old towel. He unwrapped it on the counter. "The birdhouse. Painted. Finished." "You found this," he said. "I thought you might like it hung somewhere." I nodded. "By the kitchen window. He always wanted one there." "I'll put it up tomorrow," he said. They left not long after. No lingering. No pressure. Just "see you soon." And I said, "Yes." The next morning I watched from the kitchen as Daniel stood on a step stool, hammer in hand, hanging the birdhouse just outside the window. He was careful, measuring twice, adjusting the angle until it sat straight. The paint caught the light, red and clean. The roof bowed against the white siding. When he finished, he stepped back, hands on hips, and looked through the glass at me. I waved. He smiled. Later, when he came in for coffee, we sat in the sunroom, watching birds already circling curiously. "She'd like it here," he said, nodding toward the birdhouse. "She always liked your projects." He looked down at his mug. "We've been talking about getting married. Maybe next year." I didn't flinch. "Then take your time," I said. "Make sure it's something you both can build, not something you have to defend." He nodded. "I will." There wasn't much more to say after that. He hugged me at the door, tighter this time. No apologies, no promises. Just warmth. I watched him drive away and then stood for a long time by the window. The birdhouse swayed gently in the breeze. A single bird, small, gray, uncertain, perched on the edge, looked in, flew off. It would come back or it wouldn't. But the space would be here. That afternoon I went back to the porch swing. The lemon pie was half eaten in the fridge. My sewing lay folded on the armrest. The sun fell low, brushing everything in gold. And I thought, this is how a woman reclaims herself. Not with noise, not with ultimatums, but with quiet decisions made again and again until the world bends toward her shape. I'm not angry anymore. Not bitter. Just rooted. And if my story sounds familiar to you, if you've ever felt yourself becoming smaller in your own home, in your own life, then hear this. You're allowed to draw the line. You're allowed to take back the room, the breath, the name. And if this story held something you needed, something true, leave a comment. Tell me what you reclaimed. Tell me what you finally stopped apologizing for. Because I told mine. Now I want to hear yours. Video fades out with the sound of the porch swing creaking gently, or birds chirping.